How's everybody today? Huh? He kind of stayed up all night working on that introduction, didn't he? Yeah. Hey, you all know Dale. Come on over here, Dale. That's enough. That's enough. Here we go. So, I don't know exactly. Is this thing on?
Yes.
Is it really? Can you hear me okay? I mean, usually my voice is not a problem carrying out here, but I'm not hearing this come back at me. But I'm not exactly sure where you want me to go, but I'm looking forward to the question and answer part of it. And if I may, let me give you about as quickly as I can anyway, capsulization of who I am and what it is I do and how I got here. And maybe, and let me say this, and I say this every class I go to, and I have the opportunity to speak to a lot of high school classes. I had an old, fat, gray-haired guy come to my high school when I was there, and I didn't really care what he had to say either, you know, so I get that. I get that, but I promise you there's going to be a message or two in here that if you pay attention, you're going to regret that you didn't learn. You really will. But I understand that you don't, because when I was your age, I didn't care what some fat guy said either. So, you know, you don't offend me by that. I've been down that road. In fact, I was that kid. Let me tell you this very quickly. I was an honor roll student 3 out of 4 years in high school, and then I flunked everything I took my sophomore year. I wanted to prove to Denny Serber and Mike Koppel that I was a really tough kid. So my sophomore year of high school, I flunked every class I took. And I was a pretty good basketball player, and my biology teacher named Lowell Arbs, I'll never forget this. I was a 15-year-old sophomore in high school. I was 6'4" at that time. And I was a pretty good basketball player. And Lowell Arbs, my biology teacher, actually came to me and said, Mr. Hansen, you got like a 46 average in the quarter, but I'm going to give you a passing grade because we need you on the basketball team. And I looked at him, I said, well, Mr. Arbs, I appreciate it a great deal, but my other 4 teachers didn't see it that way, so I don't think it's going to help much. I flunked every class I took. My dad beat the hell out of me when I got home. And I was grounded for 9 weeks. And when Merv Hansen grounds you, you stay grounded. I never saw the sunlight except to walk to and from school every day, and that's it. I tell you, it's one of the luckiest things that ever happened to me in my life. And I've lived, and I've never denied this, and I don't mean this as arrogant as it might sound to some of you, but I've lived a very, very lucky life. I flunked geometry, and I made up the other classes because I was like an A student, and so at the semester I passed everything except geometry. Did you take geometry in here? Yeah, really? Why? I flunked geometry at the semester, so my senior year I was a credit short of graduating, so I took typing 2. And I was the only guy in the class. I mean, there were like 5 girls and me. And I was the only guy in the class. And I could type like 70 words a minute. I mean, I really can and still can. My point is, I'm going to get in so much trouble if there's a geometry teacher around here, but I said, I'm 63 years old. I type every day of my life. Every single day of my life. My typing skill pays huge dividends. I'm 63. Nobody has ever asked me how long is the third side of that triangle. It's never come up, you know? And I got lucky. I got incredibly lucky. I then went to the Navy straight out of high school. I basically, they wanted to throw me out of the Navy, but I managed to survive. I got out of the Navy. I was a bill collector. Let me see if I can remember this. I was a bill collector. I was an employment agency counselor. I was a food salesman. I was a bill collector again, and I got fired from every job. I then went to this little rip-off trade school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I wanted to be a radio disc jockey. My entire life, from the time I was about 11, 12 years old, I wanted to be a disc jockey. I wanted to spin records, tell jokes, have fun, listen to music. I thought I'd be the greatest disc jockey ever. I went to this little rip-off trade school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I got a job as a disc jockey, and it is the worst job in the world. I'm working at KCOB in Newton, Iowa, spinning records every day, the same stupid records, day after day after day. And then they had me on the side doing the farm market reports. Anybody familiar with this at all? Yeah? Yeah. I had to do the farm market reports, which is like hog futures. And I went on the air in Newton, Iowa, and I said, hell, this is stupid. Hogs don't have a future. You know. And they fired me in Newton, Iowa. I went to Knoxville, Iowa. I got fired in Knoxville, Iowa. I went to St. Cloud, Minnesota, the worst state in the union, in my opinion. I went to St. Cloud, Minnesota. I got fired. I went to Coil Radio in Omaha, Nebraska. Again, I promise you this is all true. I got fired at Coil in Omaha, Nebraska. I then walked in the door, and here's where the story will pick up, and we'll open this up. I then walked in the door of a TV station. I was single. I was dating this very attractive young lady, and I told her I was going to move to Galveston, Texas for a radio job. And she looks at me and said, well, I really don't want to move from Omaha. Can't you find a job in Omaha? And I said, I've applied at every radio station in town. She said, why don't you try TV? And again, I promise you this is true. I simply walked in the door of a TV station and applied for the job. Never been inside a TV station in my life. And a guy named Mark Gutierrez looked at me and said, Dale, where'd you go to school? And I said, well, I went to Logan, Iowa. He said, no, I mean, where did you go to college? Where did you get your formal education? And I was a news reporter by this time, and actually I was pretty good. I had won some awards. I had done a lot of investigative reporting. I loved news reporting. And Mark Gutierrez said, well, I've heard about you on Coil. I've seen some of the stories you've done on the radio. You're a pretty good reporter. He said, where'd you go to college? I said, well, I never did. I went to the Navy straight out of high school. I'm the only guy in Dallas-Fort Worth television who's never been to college. And I said, Mark, I said, but I know this job. I know this business. He said, Dale, you can't be a news reporter. I promise you this is true. He said, Dale, you can't be a news reporter here. To be a news reporter, you have to have a college degree, preferably a degree in journalism, but you cannot be a news reporter without a college degree. So I'm just sitting there trying to pick his brain about where I might be able to find a job. He looks at me and said, Dale, have you ever thought about doing sports? I said, oh, yeah. He said, do you like sports? I said, oh, I love sports, Mark. I love sports. He said, how would you like to be the weekend sportscaster in Omaha, Nebraska? And I said, but Mark, you said that everybody who works here has to have a college degree. He goes, oh, not to be a sportscaster, Dale. You don't need any education at all for that job. And he's somewhat right about that, by the way. So I got hired, seriously, I got hired to be the weekend sportscaster in Omaha, Nebraska. A couple months later, they promoted me to the sports director. A couple years after that, they fired me in Omaha, Nebraska. I get fired in Omaha, Nebraska. I come to Dallas, Texas. I'm working at Channel 4. I'm doing pretty well. I've got job offers in LA. I've got job offers at ESPN. I've got job offers in Chicago. But I wanted to stay in Dallas, Texas. And then they hired the guy who fired me in Omaha, Nebraska. The same guy who fired me in Omaha is now my boss in Dallas, and he fired me again. True. And I went to Channel 8, and I've been there 28 years. It's a crazy life, guys. It's a crazy life that I've led. But I tell you, it all starts from a very simple principle that an English teacher of mine named Frank Weiland taught me a long time ago. I don't ever allow anybody to tell me what I can or cannot achieve. I never allow anybody to tell me what I can and cannot do. I never allow anybody to put limitations on me. All I ever do is look at everything as an opportunity. When I came to KMTV in Omaha, Nebraska, and I promise you that's a true story, Mark Gutierrez looked at me and said, you cannot work here unless you have a college degree. I had to figure out a way to get past that, and I did. I came to Channel 4 in Dallas, Texas. They never asked. I swear to you, I've been in Dallas, Texas now for about 2.5, 3 years, back in the early 80s. I've been doing some pretty good stuff. And even though I got fired, Channel 8, I knew wanted to hire me. And Marty Haig, one of the great news directors ever, Marty Haig looked at me sitting in a little conference room in Addison, Texas for the interview. and said, Dale, where'd you go to school? And I said, oh my God, here we go again. I said, Marty, I didn't go to college. Oh, you can't. I mean, we can't hire you. We can't hire you. I said, Marty, why can't you hire me? I should have gone to college. And don't misunderstand this, by the way. If you have any opportunity at all to go to college, you're a fool if you pass it up. But what I'm not afraid to tell you, and some school officials are, is that if you can't go to college for a million possible reasons, don't allow that to stop you from chasing your dreams. Do not allow the fact that you couldn't or didn't go to college stop you from chasing your dreams. And I think too many people have. I absolutely, strongly encourage each and every one of you, if not 4 years of college, at least a year, maybe 2. In this job market today, it's almost impossible to get the job that I have. I think it would be almost impossible. Not because you necessarily learn something in college that you don't learn in life, but that we have 100 applications and we have to figure out some way to weed them out. And unfortunately, too many times we start by education. So if you walk into my office and you don't have any college, quite frankly, I will give you a longer look than most people will. But most people who are looking at you for a job, they have a college degree, and they start simply by eliminating you from the process. I think it's terribly unfair, but I think it's real. I think it's reality. But when you get to that situation, you always have to find another way. And Marty HIgh looks at me and says, Dale, you have to have a college degree to work here. I said, Marty, I wish I did. I really do. But I said, I've been in this town almost 3 years. You're talking to me because you've been watching me at Channel 4 for 3 years and you want to hire me. Do you really think Bob and Martha are living in Mesquite going, you know, we'd like to follow Dale from Channel 4 to Channel 8, but we just found out yesterday that he didn't go to college 15 years ago. And Marty HIgh laughed and hired me, and I've been there 28 years. I get paid to do what most people do on their free time. I just got back from St. Louis in the World Series. I had to go. That's my job. I had to go. Buddies of mine were taking days off from work, scrambling like crazy to pay $600, $700, $800 for a ticket, hoping they could get there, pay a ridiculous airline fee, pay a ridiculous hotel bill once they got to St. Louis, and then when they came back, they had to make it up at work. Me, I went to St. Louis. I got everything paid for. I came back, they gave me a check, and I said, I need to take a couple of days off. I've been working too hard. I went to the NBA Finals with the Mavericks. Buddies of mine are calling me, Dale, can you get me tickets? I've got a couple of days vacation from work. I'm going to buy this plane ticket. I'm going to fly to Miami. I've got a ticket on StubHub for like $1,000, Dale. I want to see the game. Yeah, well, if you get there, come on down. I'm staying at the Fontainebleau Hotel. I'm on the company expense account, and I'll be sitting at courtside watching the game, and then I'll go talk to the players when the game's over. And then when I come back, I'm going on vacation. That's my job. Yeah, I've been to the Stanley Cup Finals. I'm hoping someday, I heard a rumor that we're going to get a professional football team in Dallas. All right, who wants to go first?
What kind of requirements is they looking for, like besides a college degree?
Okay, I can't hear a word you said. What were the questions? What kind of requirements? Well, again, seriously, for my job,
That's it.
there's two answers to this. One, as I said, it almost requires a college degree. And I really do. I unfortunately, I kind of wear this as a badge of honor, and I probably shouldn't. And let me just repeat this again. I do not want anybody to misunderstand this. I gave a speech to the Carrollton Farmers Branch graduation ceremony several years ago, and I told these kids, if you can't go to college, do not allow anybody to tell you what you can and cannot achieve, but I strongly recommend you go to college. And they fired the principal who booked me to be the graduation speaker because he said it was a disgusting argument to give to high school graduating seniors. I called the superintendent of schools, who was the man who fired the principal, and I said, do you have a college degree? He said, yes, I do. He said, in fact, I have a master's degree. I said, really? You have a master's degree, and I've never been to college. I said, just how much money do you make? He told me. I said, hell, I don't make that till like the end of March. You know, so. I'm not saying it's the only way we measure success, but it's a good starting point. You know. The requirement, simply it is. I think, number one, it does require a college education nowadays. It doesn't require the educational background that some people might think it does. As I tell people, whatever it is I don't know, I've got a staff of people that help me look it up. The internet is the greatest invention ever. I write all these commentaries and I'm always quoting different people. I don't know how, when I was your age, I don't know how we wrote speeches. Because I cheat like a son of a gun going to Google and finding these great quotes that I work in, and it makes me sound like I'm just the smartest person ever, you know. And yet, I think what it really does require is the enthusiasm that I have for life. I think that probably in any profession, but I think more so in this profession, every journalist that I've ever come across has an unbelievable passion for life. I like to know things. I like to understand things. I like to know what my government's doing. I like to know what my sports teams are doing, and I like to know why. Every day, I listen and read as much as I possibly can because I just like to know things. And I think every good journalist has to start from that premise that you really want to know things. And then you have to bring this passion for life. And if you don't have that, I feel sorry for you. I get up every day. I've got a mirror in my house. I know what I look like now. You know. It's very discouraging. You know. I used to have thick black hair. I know. I used to weigh like 198 pounds. I mean, I was a little stud muffin. And I've got a mirror in my house, and every day I wake up and I go, what happened to me? But it never stops me. I accept life, I chase life, I enjoy life every day. And to me, that's the real starting point for almost anything. But in this business, you've got to want to get up and chase the stories down. It's not always as much fun as you might think it is. I mean, it really isn't. But what I've been lucky enough to do is that when I do hit that proverbial wall and I get incredibly frustrated by a lot of things that happen in whether it's my station or my business or even my life, I always step back and realize just how lucky I am. And I think if you find that, then everything else falls into place. But you start with the very, very basic educational foundation. And then you start with the preparation to start small. I wasn't kidding. I went to Newton, Iowa for $94 a week. I mean, I get 1,000 kids a year come into my office. They just graduated from TCU or SMU. You know, Dale, I want to be just like you someday. I want to end up, Dale, doing just what you do, making the money you do, living the life that you do. Dale, I want to be just like you. I said, great. Go to Newton, Iowa, work 6.5 days a week for $94 a week. And then after you lose that job, go to Knoxville, Iowa. Go to St. Cloud, Minnesota. Oh, no. And I'm telling you, no, Dale, I'm thinking I'll start here. You know, I'll take like $55,000. Now, I'm not working every holiday, Dale. I worked every holiday. I'm working Thanksgiving Day. There's no holidays in my business. I'm working Thanksgiving Day. I'm working Christmas Eve. I'm working Christmas Day. I'm working New Year's Eve. I'm not working New Year's Day. I'm not working New Year's Day. But there's no holiday. My mom and dad used to go nuts. They'd call me and say, let's get together for a little family reunion. Can't. You know. Thanksgiving Day is a big day for the Cowboys. Used to be bigger. But it's that kind of a commitment that you have to make as well. And again, I think the good journalists, especially those of you that might be interested in pursuing this, whether it's I don't know that newspapers are going to survive, but certainly the websites will, the bloggers, you know, there's always going to be a need for somebody to write a story. We cannot survive as a people if we don't have somebody providing the information. There will always be that need. It may not be in the same form that it has been for the last 40 to 50 years. In fact, I'm pretty sure that it won't be. But we need good people to write good stories. And being one of the old guys in the business, I'm a little bit concerned about where this thing is headed. we've gotten so sloppy with our reporting nowadays that there used to be an argument that we had to be right. Now there's this great argument that what really matters is you have to be first. And I think it's a stupid argument because, in all seriousness, in today's marketplace, if I break a story at 6 o'clock at night, by 6:30, everybody in town's got it. It's already on the Twitter. It's already on the websites. It's already on talk radio. Yeah. Nobody knows who breaks a story. I think it's the stupidest thing we continue to do in my business is they're always trying to be first. I prefer to be right. I think if you're right, more often than you're first, you will win. You will absolutely win, and I can give you 100 examples of that. And that's not a great answer, but it's my starting point.
On WFAA, speaking about journalism going downhill, in your opinion, what is being a good journalist about?
Well, it's a very good question, and quite honestly, it's an argument we have every day in our station. To me, a good journalist is the person who does chase for the facts. And like I said, the problem we've gotten, we started to invade people's privacy, which I think is obscene. The story that came out yesterday was Ron Washington, the Rangers manager, being secretly recorded in the clubhouse, and oh my gosh, he cusses. Oh, I've never heard that. I was stunned. I was shocked. I was hurt. But, Jerry Jones was drunk in a bar. Somebody secretly recorded him, and the same argument. Jerry Jones drunk in a bar? Really? Who would have guessed? Who would have guessed? I see too many people, in my opinion, too many people who are so concerned about being first, bringing the attention to themselves. I mean, I can't tell you, obviously, because they would violate what I've done. But I've gotten so many stories that I just don't do over the years because it's really none of my business. It may not seem like it all the time, but I'm not about invading somebody's privacy just so that I can make a name for myself. When I was covering the Cowboys in the early 90s, for example, when they were winning Super Bowls, I could have been on ESPN almost every night with something that I knew. But it wasn't important. It wasn't important. It wasn't a news story. I want to see people get back that, as I said to one player, he was sitting there smoking marijuana one day. We're sitting there playing cards, and he lights up a joint. And he looks at me and he goes, "Do you want some?" And I said, "No, I don't." He goes, "Oh my God, are you going to report this?" And I said, "Not if you play Sunday." I said, "It's not my business." In that particular case, I didn't feel that it was my business that he smoked a joint on a Tuesday night or whatever it was. Now, at the same time, had I gone public with it, it would have been a big story. It would have been a huge story. But I don't do that. Mark Cuban and I have had battles all the time. I think the role of a journalist is to find something that affects the public. And if this particular player didn't play on Sunday, that had a great impact on the public. And I would have said why. But if he had a beer on Tuesday, if he smoked this joint on Tuesday, in this particular case, to take it to the extreme, if he's got a girlfriend, it's really not my business anymore. And we've reached this point where I do think talk radio is going to be the death of our civilization as we know it. You've got to fill so much time on talk radio, and it is referred to many times as shock radio, and people just throw out everything. And maybe it's true. I spend so much time at night explaining to people why I didn't do the story about so-and-so being traded to the Yankees because they heard it on some radio. No, what they heard on some radio station starts off as, "Hey, what if we did this? What if we traded this guy? Hey, do you think it's true that this guy did? Do you think that's true? It could be true. I don't know if it's true. Let's talk about it anyway." And then I don't do it at 10 o'clock at night because I have this really strange, I kind of deal with facts most of the time. And then I have to explain to people, well, why didn't you have that story? I think people, if you're a journalist, your main, and to me, really only objective is to shine a light on the issues that impact the public. And if it doesn't impact the public, just because it's titillating or sensational, I don't think is news. And I don't think a journalist would go near it. I don't think they would. But I mean, this all changed in Watergate. And, you know, you've all read about it, right? You're all familiar with it. But I mean, you know, the media used to be, especially the sports media. I mean, the sports media used to drink and hang out with all the players and the owners and the coaches, and it was just all buddy-buddy, and sportscasters in particular were cheerleaders for the most part. And then here comes Watergate, and everybody wants to, you know, and I have a great deal of respect for what happened during Watergate, but now we're into this gotcha mentality, and we want to get you. And before somebody beats me to the question, I pulled the same deal on SMU, as you may know. But SMU was cheating. They were cheating like crazy. And I got them. I nailed them. I did the story that ended up shutting down the university's football program. And I don't apologize for that. People say, well, you're trying to make the news. I said, no, I'm not trying to make the news. I'm uncovering what really is news. The fact that SMU was cheating was depriving every other university in the area of an opportunity to compete. That, to me, is the difference. But just to expose somebody for doing something, whether I happen to think it's immoral, whether I happen to think it's maybe even illegal, I don't go there. But one of the great things about journalism is that it's a constantly evolving process. And we have that discussion, seriously, we have that discussion once a week in our offices. It's a good question.
And once you figure out that the story itself is important to the public, how do you go about writing the story itself?
It again, kind of depends on the story a little bit, but I love just to write, period. And it's not quite the process that you might do, say, for a high school class or even a college class. At least from what I understand about it, you know, they'll assign you a topic and then you come back 3 or 4 days. I got like an hour. Yeah, I mean, you're really many times I've got like an hour, sometimes less. And it really is just kind of that talent, and I don't mean that in a glorious way. It's the skill that you develop. I mean, I write stories. I wrote a commentary the other night about Joe Paterno at Penn State, and I wrote it in about 10 minutes. Now, I spent about an hour and a half tweaking it. But in my own particular case, when I write, I get all the facts. You know, I have a little notepad in front of me, and I get, okay, they did this, they did that. I go, all right. And then I'm like any other writer. I need that first line. Once that first line pops out, I write like this. Every commentary I've written, if the commentary runs 2.5 minutes, it took me about 2:45 to write it. That's my talent. That's my gift. Now, I'll spend days laboring over, like for Thank God for Kids at Christmas time. I'll write that, and it'll run 2.5 minutes long, and it took me like 2:45 to write it. Now, it took me, say, 2 hours to come up with that first line, and then it'll take me 2 days to go back and tweak it. But you just have to be able to bang it out, and it's one of the talents again. It's what separates it. George Reba's been with me for 30 years. He's one of my favorite guys. He takes forever. You know, he cannot, he writes and rewrites and rewrites. And I'm saying, well, George, where's your copy? I need to see your copy. He goes, I'm working on it. You've been working on it for 3 hours, George. Where is it? But that's what he does. It's one of the problems that he has. Then he makes up for it because he does this, this, and this, and this. But it's a very simple process. You get all your notes in a row. Try to identify exactly what that story is, what it is you're trying to tell, what it is you're trying to convey. I'm a big believer, I think a mistake that most people make is they write too formally. I think especially in television, I try to write as conversationally as I can. I mean, I write the way I'm talking to you now, if you ever see, and at least people say this, I hope this is true. I get criticized a lot because I use a lot of slang. And I use what I consider to be common slang. And one of my first Omaha sportscasts I did, Creighton Blue Jays had a very good basketball team. I said, Creighton got beat tonight. Oh my gosh, here come every English teacher in Omaha. You know, you can't say got beat. I mean, why is that wrong, James? I don't know what it is. But if you go someplace and you say, hey, how did Duncanville do last night? Oh man, we got beat. At least that's what I say. That's what everybody I know says, right? I mean, I've never once said to my friends, they asked me, how did the Cowboys do the other day? Well, the Cowboys were thoroughly embarrassed and soundly thrashed at the hands of the powerful and mighty Philadelphia Eagles. I never said, who says that? Who says that? No, hey, how'd that DeSoto game yesterday? Oh, man, DeSoto got beat. Really? You know? And that's why I go on the air. I always use this line, my guys always team, but I always refer to Bob and Martha. I want Bob and Martha to understand me. You know, and I don't, you know, the Cowboys were soundly thrashed and thoroughly embarrassed at the hand. Oh, stop that. And that's what George does. And again, I love George, but that's what George does. I said, who says that, George? How about this? They lost. Cowboys lost. Michael Vick was incredible. They're three, you know, just boom. And so that's what I try to do. And I think a lot of people make that mistake, in my opinion. I think you want to write, and I've said this forever. There's an old saying in my business that you basically write for like the third grade level. And I think that's incredibly offensive. I mean, I really do. But there's more truth to it than I care to admit. If you start writing much higher sometimes than a third or fourth grade level, you lose the audience, which might say a great deal about the audience, quite frankly. But it's somewhat painfully true. And it's why, like in my sportscast, I always say in every show I do, if I'm referring to Jerry Jones, and there's sportscasters that say, well, you know, Jerry Jones said today. Well, I just moved it. Who's Jerry Jones? Now, I know that most people, I'm sure, know. I always say Cowboys owner Jerry Jones. I always say Cowboys quarterback Tony Romo. I always say Mavericks forward Dirk Nowitzki. Because I guarantee you there are people who don't know. As shocking as that might be to some of you, there are people who don't know everything like you and me do. And I think it's important that I never leave anybody in the audience behind. But I just drop it in casually, drop it in comfortably, get to the story. I'm very blunt, I'm very direct, I'm very quick. I don't like all the lavish nonsense phrases, so that my audience can follow along. Because it is somewhat true that whether it's newspaper, blogs, whatever, we really do have a relatively short attention span. It's somewhat sad, but I think, and I blame you guys for that, by the way, you know. But, you know, there's this shorter attention span, so you got to grab them quick. As I'm sure you've talked about this. You got to hit them up front. You flesh it out in the middle, and then I'm a big fan of a big close. That's a well-written story. I've got to hook them in the beginning. Why I have to tell. Not only the line I would use. You not only have to tell them the story, you have to tell them why the story is important. Now, you don't just say, oh, by the way, this is why it's important. But you have to let them know why they want to know this story. The story of and by itself just isn't enough. You have to tell them this is a good story and subtly remind them as to why it's a good story. And when you figure that out, you're on your way. That's what people do. That's what we all do.
What brought you to starting Thank God for Kids?
Well, that's my Thank God for Kids is one of my favorite things ever. And I stumbled onto it. It was 1982. I used to live in Keller. And I was driving to work in downtown Dallas. And the Oak Ridge Boys I used to listen to country music in those days. And I apologize for that, by the way. But there was this song by the Oak Ridge Boys. And I love words, as you might have noticed. I use them a lot, but I love the written word. I just think it's one of the most powerful things in our society. And I'm driving down the road listening to this song, and every phrase just hit me. And I literally just saw it. And I got to tell you a story about this as well. So I went into the station. I was working at Channel 4 in 1982. And I had this incredible kid named Lee Gonzalez and another kid working for me named David Handler. And they were the photographer and the editor. And I said, I've got this great idea for Christmas. Because we always needed to come up with something to fill this Christmas Day sportscast because there's really nothing going on usually. And I said, I heard this song, and every phrase in that song, it just touches me, and I think I know how we can put it together. So we started editing and pulling at all the shots and matching it up and doing, you know, the music video, if you will, which was really big in those days. I mean, in the early 80s, there were a lot of sportscasts that would take highlights and put them to music. Not so much anymore, but back then. The best part of this story to me is I was very hands-on in those days. I mean, everything that got on the air, I had to put the finishing touches on. And I would say, here, let's move this cut away back. Let's move this shot over here. Let's change this. So we start working on this thing about 3 in the afternoon. It's now 4 in the morning. Because it's kind of a long process, especially in those days before all the new technology. So about 4 in the morning, I said, guys, let's take a break. Let's go home. We'll come back about noon. We'll finish it up. We'll put it on the air tonight. So I drive back to Keller. I come back the next day about noon, and they're still sitting there. David Handler and Lee Gonzalez. And I'm like, what'd you guys do? And they said, well, we kept working on it, and it's done. And I swear to you, my first reaction was, oh, man. I mean, they worked on it all night, and I know I'm going to change it. I know that I'm going to change something in that video. And they said, we know that. Whatever you want to change, no problem, but let's take a look at it. And I started crying. I cry every year. And, of course, as my wife will tell you, I'd cry watching the Waltons when Grandpa would get sick. You know, I'm easy. But I watched this thing, and it just hit me. And it does to, forgive me, it just gets me. It's perfect. It's perfect. Every phrase, every line of the song, it just tells the story of what I believe. So we put it on the air that night, and the town just went nuts. I mean, the reaction just went nuts. So a few months later, this was Christmas of 1982. I got fired in March of '83. I called the kid working there then named Paul Crane. I said, hey, Paul, can you get me that tape? He said, yeah, I'll get it for you. Which was not ethical or legal, but it was mine, you know. And every time that goes off, I want to eat. I'm like Pavlov's dog here or something, you know. And we ran it. I then took it to Channel 8, and we've been running it ever since. And then I kind of evolved into writing the commentaries, and you know, some are sad, some are happy, somewhere in between. And it's one of the best things I've ever done. It's one of the, to me, it's one of my favorite things I've ever done. And right about now, I start getting emails. Yeah, Dad, and this is part of my love. For 21 years now, it's always been on the Sunday before Christmas. For 21 straight years, it airs on the Sunday before Christmas. And every year, I get about 50 emails going, yeah, Dale, when are you going to be running Thank God for Kids? What night is that going to be on? I said, I don't know. Maybe the Sunday before Christmas, for goodness sakes. But it's amazingly flattering as to how many people watch it and comment on it. And then you know, if I'm talking about, which I do a lot, so, you know, a friend of mine's son was killed in a car accident, and I wrote about him. And we had a little 5-year-old boy in our neighborhood. He got run over by his tractor. His dad, he was out in the fields with his dad, and he fell off the tractor. So I write about kids. I write about life. And I tell you one other quick story, if I may. My mom died a couple of years ago, and I knew I was going to write about my mom, and I had nothing. I had nothing. And yet I knew that everybody was looking to me, or at least I felt this way, knowing that I was going to write about my mom. So they're all thinking, oh, this one's going to be good. This one's, oh my gosh, Thank God for Kids. And Dale's going to talk about his mom in some fashion. It'll be unbelievable. And I've got nothing. And it was on December 12th, about 4 o'clock in the morning. I wake up. I got the whole thing. I got the whole thing. I keep a notebook by my bed because I do get weird thoughts in the middle of the night. And I literally got up and I swung my feet out of bed and I turned on this little lamp and I write the entire thing. My wife rolls over and she said, what are you doing? I said, I'm writing Thank God for Kids. And she goes, it's 4 in the morning. I said, but I got it. I got it. Now the problem was I couldn't read most of it when I got up the next day, but I mean, and it just came to me in the middle of the night. The whole thing. I mean, line for line for line for line for line. So I went back to the station that very day. I write it out. I read it to my buddies. They all start crying. I start crying. So now I'm going to have to make myself immune to this commentary because my mom was a special lady. And my closing line was, I quoted a George Jones song because it was true. She stood in the shadows so that others could shine. She loved a lot in her time. And so I write this line. And I write this about my mom, and I look over, my 2 producers are crying. I'm crying. I sat at my desk, I read it 150 times out loud. So that by the time I got on the air, it's like remote control. Sean Hamilton, who's the greatest producer I've ever had, and I've had a bunch of them, unbeknownst to me, at the end of the piece, I then said, George Jones said it best about my mom. She stood in the shadows so that others could shine. She loved a lot in her time. I'm Dale Hansen. Good night. The lights came down, and Sean took that song and put a picture of my mom, me, and Troy Aikman standing there together, and here comes the song. And George Jones, "As she stood in the shadows," and I just start sobbing on the desk. I mean, my head hits the desk, and I'm just sobbing. And it goes back to the power of the words. Words move people. Words change the world. You change people with the power of the written word. It's the greatest gift that some people have. It's an unbelievable gift. And I look at that as my opportunity to open up. I've talked about my kids, the good, the bad. I've talked about my grandkids. I've talked about my friends who've lost their kids. And it just means a great deal to me. It means a great deal to me. So.